So we are here tonight, and I want to thank everyone for coming out, tuning in online for the Summer Village of Golden Days Land Use Bylaw Project meeting. This is with respect to the Summer Village of Golden Days Land Use Bylaw. It's been on the books for a few years. Every municipality in Alberta is required to have one. It deals with land use and development in your municipality. And because the Summer Village's Land Use Bylaw is a few years old now, several years in fact, council believed it was time to go through a review and an update to it to make sure that it addresses what the Summer Village needs today as it moves forward into the future, specifically with respect to new developments and redevelopments of existing lots in the Summer Village. So an agenda of what we're going to try to achieve this evening is our introductions. I'll get into a little bit more about municipal planning services and who we are. The logistics and format of the meeting, Alison sort of covered that. The purpose of this meeting, how the land use bylaw relates to some other documents that the Summer Village has adopted, what the land use bylaw is, and we'll talk about the review and update process that has gone on so far and what is to come in the future. And then we'll go over what the draft land use bylaw has in terms of structure and some of the key content, some of the proposed changes and modifications that were made to reflect some of the feedback that we were getting from council. And we'll talk about the next steps and how community members can continue to contribute to this in addition to the meeting that we're having tonight. So municipal planning services, just briefly about us, we are a small...
Can I just jump in quickly? Yeah. I apologize. I thought there was a way for me to turn off the participant video, but I don't seem to be able to do that in the meeting. So just for everyone, because we are live streaming this, if you don't want your video to show up on the YouTube video, you can turn off your video. I just wanted everyone to know that. But if you're okay with your video showing up, then no worries. Sorry to interrupt, Brad.
No, not a problem, and that's a good piece of information. So municipal planning services, we're a small little planning firm. We work exclusively with municipalities to help provide planning services to them. Our principal, Jane Daphne, she's unavailable this evening, but she's been involved in this project right from the beginning. Myself, Brad McDonald, and Alison Roseland, we're all planners with municipal planning services. And the main thing that we do in our office is we provide day-to-day planning advice and services for municipalities. So everyone from towns and counties, villages and summer villages. I believe we have 75 plus small municipalities that we work for, and among them are the Summer Village of Golden Days and the other summer villages on Pigeon Lake, as well as the County of Wetaskiwin. So for many municipalities, we process subdivision applications, we assist with development permit applications. So right from the moment we wake up, we're working with land use bylaws in terms of reviewing applications and working with municipalities in terms of interpreting the regulations within them. In the Pigeon Lake area, we've worked on the Pigeon Lake North Intermunicipal Development Plan. We're currently working to finalize the Pigeon Lake South Intermunicipal Development Plan. And we worked on, for the summer villages that recently adopted new municipal development plans, we were working with them to do that. So that was, I believe, 9 municipal development plans in recent years. Alison kind of covered the logistics of the meeting here, so I won't go into too much more, but it is, again, being streamed on live on YouTube. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to bring them up with Alison in the chat, and we'll address them either as we go along or at the end. So the purpose of this meeting is we want to present to you some information some information about how the Summer Village has gone about to date, updating its land use bylaw. We're going to provide you with some information and a bit of an overview on some of the content, both in terms of what's in the existing land use bylaw and what we're proposing council consider for adoption in a new land use bylaw or an updated land use bylaw. An important part of that is presenting it to community members and getting their feedback and providing you folks with an opportunity to let us know what is or isn't working in the current one and what might or might not work in what we're proposing. So it's all right now. What we have is a draft land use bylaw. In no way is it in its finalized form. We know that coming out of this meeting tonight, and as folks have an opportunity to review more of the draft in the future after we had this chat, that there might be more comments or concerns or issues that you might identify. And we look forward to getting any feedback that we can so that we can work with council and administration to revise the draft to better meet the needs of everyone. So within planning in Alberta kind of covers the land use bylaw is the document that administration and residents use to more or less decide how specific developments occur. But guiding those are statutory plans, and the statutory plans kind of identify what the future form of development will be in your community, how your community will grow, where it will grow. These are the vision documents for not only your municipality, but your larger community in general. So under the framework of planning in Alberta, municipalities adopt these plans. And one of which, the higher level one, is an intermunicipal development plan. And for the Summer Village, there we have the Pigeon Lake North Intermunicipal Development Plan, which was adopted by the County of Wetaskiwin and the summer villages of Silver Beach, Argentia Beach, and Golden Days, kind of the summer villages on the north end of the lake that share a boundary with the County of Wetaskiwin. And so typically what you see for an intermunicipal development plan is that it is adopted by two municipalities that share a border. But in this case, multiple municipalities got together and decided to have a kind of a shared uniform vision for how they would like to coordinate future land use and how to deal with intermunicipal communication between the municipalities. So this plan is a bit of a high-level, forward-thinking document, but the land use bylaw must be consistent with it. For the Summer Village of Golden Days specifically, there's a municipal development plan, and that's a bylaw adopted by council. And the current municipal development plan for the Summer Village was adopted approximately 12, 13 years ago, bylaw 221. A municipal development plan is required by all municipalities. This wasn't so back when this was adopted in 2009, but in recent years, the province changed the Municipal Government Act to require all municipalities to adopt one. So, and in some ways, Golden Days was ahead of the curve of everyone. Most summer villages on Pigeon Lake didn't have a municipal development plan up until very recently. So it is required. The Summer Village does have one in place. And what it does is it guides future developments and redevelopment in the Summer Village through specific policies. And they don't necessarily get into the detail of guiding specifically how development must look, but it does provide that guidance for the land use bylaw to follow. So the land use bylaw must be consistent with the municipal development plan. So some of the direction from the intermunicipal development plan and the municipal development plan for the Summer Village, they identify the kind of some important themes, and they are promoting collaboration and communication with regional partners in the Pigeon Lake area and neighboring municipalities. They both seek to have future development being well planned, and specifically to mitigate any environmental risk, to make sure that as development occurs in the Summer Village and in the Pigeon Lake area in general, that the local environment, and I think a bit more specifically the Pigeon Lake and Pigeon Lake watershed, it is protected for the future. And the intermunicipal development plan, the Pigeon Lake North intermunicipal development plan, specifically talks about seeking to incorporate watershed management planning best practices in how planning is dealt with on a day-to-day basis. So these directions are from plans that the Summer Village has adopted for consideration for a land use bylaw. So now that we're into the process of adopting, or sorry, reviewing and updating the land use bylaw, these are some things that we must follow. So a land use bylaw, again, is another document that is mandatory for all municipalities in Alberta. And this has been in place for a while now. Whether you're a municipality of 2 people or 2 million people, all must have one. Specifically, what a land use bylaw does is it's kind of the rule book or the toolkit that identifies the specific process that you must follow for subdivision and development applications, how you notify adjacent landowners, how you notify referral agencies and other service providers when a development or subdivision application is received, how a municipality deals with enforcement of its rules in terms of obeying the land use bylaw, and how appeals are launched by persons who might have a development permit application refused, a subdivision refused, or might not agree with a decision that was issued. A land use bylaw establishes very specific regulations for general and specific types of development. So it will look at things like accessory building, which would be sheds and garages, and provides regulations for that. It looks at things like, sorry, I'm just trying to think of an example, fencing, how tall your fence can be before you require a development permit. So it looks at those very specific things and establishes the regulations that must be followed. When you hear things like zoning, that's what we're talking about. In Alberta, the legislation uses the word districting. So tonight I might be talking a bit about districts, but at the end of the day, it's kind of the same thing as when you hear about zones or zoning. And the land use bylaw kind of divides the Summer Village into different districts or zones with respect to the different types of areas within it. So just creating a hypothetical municipality, you might have an agricultural zone or a district in one area of the county of Wetaskiwin, but you might have a residential district or zone in another area. Within those districts, there's identified permitted and discretionary uses within each district, and that kind of establishes the rules as to what types of developments you can construct or apply to have developed on your land, depending on which district you're located within, and whether they are permitted, which would allow you kind of a greater path to having that done, or a discretionary use, which uses the discretion of the development authority to have that happen. So the land use bylaw currently in effect for the Summer Village is bylaw 254. It's on the books, it's on the Summer Village's website right now. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, I would highly recommend you do so, especially if you're planning to develop or redevelop your lot in the future. Some of the shortfalls with it is that bylaw doesn't cover any of the recent changes to provincial legislation in recent years, specifically with respect to development permit processing, notification, and appeals. The processes identified in there, if they're identified at all, are different than what the province requires today. So there might be some conflict in terms of what you would expect to happen versus what has to happen on the Summer Village's end. And again, it's not consistent with all policies in the IDP or the MDP. So we need to look at how to kind of take all 3 documents and make them not only consistent with each other, but work in harmony together. So just giving you a brief update on what we've been doing to date. So this project began about this time last year, and Municipal Planning Services, myself and Jane, we met with the previous council and had a bit of a startup meeting to identify, what the council today thought some of the issues should be for updating the land use bylaw. And knowing that an election was imminent, we did hold off on wait till the election was done, and we had follow-up meetings with the new council. We prepared a draft land use bylaw based on our recommendations, and we reviewed it with council. And from that review, we further updated the land use bylaw. Back at the end of the summer of the last year, 2021, we had a survey just to gather some information from community members and some of their ideas. And I will say that the response rate to that survey was extremely high. Typically, when we deal with a Summer Village land use bylaw review project, we are looking at kind of in a 2 or 3 dozen range in terms of responses. And I think we almost received 90 from the Summer Village Golden Days, which was really valuable because we had a pretty good feeling that a lot of community concerns and issues were addressed in it. Right now, we are in the phase of presenting the draft land use bylaw to community members for their review and their feedback. And after that, what we'll do is we will take any comments that we received tonight or in the coming days and put that together into a report for council. We've been calling them what we heard reports. It just kind of catalogs what we receive from community members, from council themselves, and any agencies that we circulate this to, and be able to provide council with a focused picture of how the current draft works with their community, and some opportunities for revising it in the future as they bring it forward for the bylaw adoption and public hearing phase. So the current land use bylaw for the Summer Village is a shorter document than what we proposed to date. And just because what we are proposing is a bit longer, doesn't mean that it, I guess, is creating more hoops and red tape to development. I think at the end of the day, what we are proposing just kind of more clearly spells out some of the processes that must be followed, and provides community members and potential developers in the community with a better understanding of what might be required of them when either proposing a subdivision or a development on their lot. So at the end of the day, we do have a fair bit more information in this draft than what the current bylaw states, but it is a bit more of a clearer document because it spells those processes out, and it aims to clarify some terms and processes that might be a bit more harder to follow if they weren't spelled out clearly in the draft. There's less room for interpretation. So the draft document that we have before us, that's posted on the Summer Village's website for anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to review it. It kind of follows this format. The current document, as I was mentioning, is a much shorter document, and about half of it is the bylaw itself. And then there are a whole series of regulations that are attached as schedules to it that are kind of just appended or stapled to the end. And that I find is not quite as easy to use. It's a bit harder to read. You get to the end of the bylaw and you think you're at the end, and then you realize that there's these postscript chapters at the end that kind of cover the things that you were expecting it to cover in the first place. So we like throwing this right into the bylaw itself, which is why the number of chapters are much higher than what's in the current bylaw. So I'll go through these kind of item by item, and then we'll get into a bit more detail, specifically with the land use regulations. So right at the beginning of the document, we've added a user guide, which is a one-page bit of a preface that helps provide an understanding of how to interpret the different regulations in the document, how to follow the processes, how to understand terms, and how to ask for help, how to ask Summer Village administration on how to interpret different processes and regulations, and when to basically when to ask for help in terms of identifying what must be done in order to apply for different things. The introduction section of the land use bylaw includes the title, the bylaw information, the commencement, so when the bylaw comes into effect, the repealing of the previous bylaw, which is hopefully the current bylaw in place, the purpose of it, what it applies to, so that would be the entire Summer Village of Golden Days, and just some information about requiring all development within the Summer Village to comply with the regulations of the bylaw. One of the most kind of pumped up sections in the draft versus the current bylaw is the interpretation section. So the current land use bylaw has about 41 different definitions within it. We've bumped this up substantially to 191, or in that range. And we like to kind of include much more definitions in our land use bylaws because it helps put everyone on a level playing field in terms of key terms, either within the document or that might be used when having discussions about subdivision and development. We've added several graphics to help illustrate what these terms are and to help understand how you interpret things like where a front yard is on a lakefront lot versus a back lot. Another thing about the definitions is that as we've been working on other land use bylaws in the Pigeon Lake area, we've been trying to make these all consistent with one another. So that if you have a neighbor in Silver Beach, or if you have a neighbor in even Poplar Bay on the south side, that they are looking at, that you're all using the same language. So that if you are 5 minutes down the road from another municipality, you're not running into a situation where a term used in one municipality is different than another. So the authorities section of the land use bylaw identifies the roles and responsibilities of different key actors in implementing the land use bylaw. And that includes council. Council has some specific functions such as adopting the land use bylaw, considering amendments to it, and working within the direct control district. And I'll get into that more in a bit later. The roles and responsibilities of the Development Authority and the Development Authority Officer, the Subdivision Authority, and the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board. There's a section with respect to land use bylaw amendments, and that kind of covers what the application requirements would be if someone wished to propose an amendment to the land use bylaw. It identifies considerations that council that'll be made by council when an application is received. It talks about who may apply, and generally that's speaking, that is just about anyone in the in the Summer Village, including council itself. What the notification and public hearing requirements would be. So if an application for an amendment was made, how it would follow so that everyone in the Summer Village knew about it. What the submission requirements would be. It wouldn't just be written on the back of a napkin, and that the amendment would be made by bylaw. It wouldn't just be a single meeting of council and a couple head nods, that this would go through the process of having first, second, and third reading. One of the key sections in this draft land use bylaw deals with the development permit process. It is a bit of a longer section, and it covers many things that are currently in the land use bylaw and expands on some things that are spoken of in less detail or not at all. So we cover things like the control of development, that the whole purpose of having a development permit for certain things. It identifies when a development permit is not required, and that's pretty key, because if it's not listed in that list, generally speaking, it would require a development permit to construct what isn't identified on that list. Some of the things not requiring a development permit are things such as the building or repairing of small decks or driveways, things that are lawfully under construction already at the time that this bylaw might be adopted in the future, gates and fences of a certain height. I've identified here in yellow some small accessory buildings. In the current draft land use bylaw, we have some small accessory buildings up to, I believe it is 160 square feet, not requiring a permit. And we are proposing to make this 110 because code requirements identify that anything over 110 square feet requires a building permit. And we would hate to see situations where folks identify that just because you don't need a development permit doesn't necessarily mean that you don't require a building permit. So we just kind of want to make those consistent. It is a proposed change by Municipal Planning Services, but it's something that we'll talk about later with council when we meet with them again. And this list of things not requiring a permit is much longer. And I invite you to, if you haven't done so already, to peek at the draft land use bylaw and have a look at that for yourself. This section also covers things like non-conforming buildings and uses. So if you don't conform to the land use bylaw today, what some of the rights and rules are with continuing your use or your development. Application requirements for submitting a development permit process, and that's been updated to reflect kind of modern standards with development next to a major lake. Some of the newer sections deal with notice of complete or incomplete applications and development permit notifications in general. And changes to the Municipal Government Act in recent years had necessitated updating these sections because of new timeline requirements for getting notification out and for providing notice to of decisions made. We deal with the validity of permits in this section. So when a development permit may or may not come into effect, and what is required to have a valid permit. We cover too the issue of variances. So if an application is made for something that doesn't quite fit with the rules and regulations, the discretion that the development authority has to issue a variance. And in some municipalities that deals or is restricted to things like height, size of a building on a lot, or minimum yard requirements. And then we also deal with the conditions of a development permit and development agreements. And one of the conversations that we recently had with council respected adding in potentially requiring certain more substantial forms of development to require a road use agreement that may require securities be taken to ensure that any development that might occur in the summer village that would potentially negatively impact roads or other infrastructure to more or less make sure that they're either protected or if they need to be fixed or replaced, that the necessary resources are in place to be able to do that. But this section dealing with conditions of development permits and development agreements in general kind of covers what may or may not be asked to ensure that as development is constructed under a development permit, that the summer village has what it needs to ensure the safety of its not only its community but its assets. A new section in the draft that isn't in the current land use bylaw deals with subdivision. And for the majority of community members, You may not be thinking about subdivision at all, but the summer village does have a significant supply of, I guess, undeveloped land. And at any time, anyone could apply for a subdivision. So we just wanted to put processes in place that if an application was received, we wanted to identify what some of the requirements would be, what the process would be to follow, how the subdivision authority would act in terms of processing that information, and what some of the requirements and the conditions would be for a subdivision approval. We also cover appeals. So appeals not only to subdivision, but development permits as well. So we briefly covered in this draft and updated substantially, I guess, from the current land use bylaw, which is out of date with respect to appeals, who may appeal and when they can, what the timeline and process would be for appealing, and also covering too what appeal body would hear the appeal. And this has changed recently with provincial legislation as well. The Summer Village does have a subdivision and development appeal board, which would typically hear appeals to subdivision and developments in the Summer Village. But in place now is the Land and Property Rights Tribunal, which is formerly the Municipal Government Board. And the province has expanded the scenarios in which it will hear certain types of subdivision and development appeals. So for the Summer Village, when they receive a subdivision application or a development permit application, there will always be the question as to which appeal body it may or may not go to in the future should that application be appealed. We have a section in the land use bylaw dealing with enforcement of, specifically with respect to enforcing the land use bylaw. And again, this is something that was covered in the current land use bylaw, but we've revised it to kind of follow what some other summer villages are doing around Pigeon Lake. But we're also looking to cover kind of the form it in the way that it covers the process that the summer village would follow to deal with an enforcement issue. So it identifies actions that the development officer might take to enforce regulations of the land use bylaw or the conditions of development permit appeal. It covers the rights of the development officer to inspect a property to ensure compliance. It identifies when stop orders and violation tags and violation tickets might be issued. But it also provides information too about the rights of the development proponent or the subdivision proponent to appeal a stop order should one be received for a perceived non-compliance issue. So those sections, kind of sections from 1 to about 8, deal with kind of the administrative side of things. For most people, unless you are looking to find out what the process is for applying for a development permit or applying for subdivision, a lot of that information is kind of the process that will be used by one of those authorities, whether it's the subdivision authority or the development authority in reviewing applications. The following sections kind of cover the rules for everyone to follow with respect to either to their land or when they're looking to develop certain forms of land uses. So the current land use bylaw covers a fair bit of specific and general types of land uses. What you see in yellow are proposed new sections or sections that were either significantly expanded or significantly revised based on our feedback from council and our discussions with council. So the ones that are bolded, we are going to cover today. Otherwise, we would have you here probably till midnight, kind of covering everything in the land use bylaw. And we wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of have it to read yourself. And if you need to get in touch with us, we'll provide contact information at the end of this if you have specific questions that you need answered after. But the general regulations in this section cover all developments in the Summer Village, regardless of what zone or district you're located within. And one of the things in reviewing the most recent draft is we've sort of looked at how many environmental regulations, are in this document, and we might be coming to the conclusion that we need a separate section 9 that just kind of groups together the different environmental regulations in the draft, so that they're all kind of put together and they can be read together. So one of the things that we've flagged for community input or your consideration tonight is dealing with accessory buildings and accessory uses. An accessory building generally is any building that's on your lot that isn't your dwelling. So whether it's your shed or your garden suite in the back or your garage detached from the dwelling, that's what an accessory building is. The maximum number of accessory buildings on a lot in the current draft and in the current land use bylaw and in the draft that we have on the website, they both use the same number, which is 2. There's a minor wording change that we've kind of looked at. The current draft talks about having number of buildings on a lot being 3, one of which is your dwelling. So we've kind of separated that out and spoke a bit more specifically that in terms of accessory buildings, the maximum with a development permit is 2. Sorry, go ahead, Allison.
Just going to say we had a couple of questions about accessory buildings. So
okay.
I thought maybe if you have something else to add, maybe do that and then I can ask the question, or let me know what your preference is.
Sure. I've just got 2 more things here to go over, and then we can have that kind of go over those questions.
Perfect.
In both the current land use bylaw and in the draft, there's slightly different language with respect to whether you are a lakefront lot or a back lot. And generally speaking, for both, it restricts where on your lot an accessory building could be developed. On your back lot, it would be within the rear yard, which is the kind of side away from the road. And if you have a lakefront lot, it would be in your backyard your rear yard as well. But your rear yard on a lakefront lot is the roadside, not the lakeside. So there is some minor wording change in there, but generally the intent is the same. From our discussions with council, we included a statement in there prohibiting boathouses. I can't remember right off the top of my head if there are many or any boathouses in the Summer Village, but it was a discussion that came up. So we flagged that and identified that as a change in the land use bylaw. Allison, if you want to interject.
So the first question that we had was related to garages and accessory buildings. So the question, sort of a bit of the preamble to the question, was that garages are lumped into accessory buildings, and it's only clear on how tall it can be and the setbacks from the property lines. There is no separation between garages and sheds. They are lumped together but are very different in size. Should the rules be separated for the items?
That's a good question. Whether a garage, and I think generally speaking, when we talk about garages, we're talking about essentially a car house, something in which you store your vehicle or your something motorized, versus a shed, which when I think of that, at least I think of something that has like a person door to it where you can store your chattel and your lawn care equipment and things of that nature. We've dealt with some summer villages that have identified having, if you have 2 accessory buildings, one can be of a certain size and the second one cannot be anywhere near, like can't be quite as big. That is not something that that was brought up with us with council. Allison, we'll keep that in the discussion for the future. I think in the land use bylaw, it talks about the maximum area of developable area for buildings on your lot. So how you decide to distribute your dwelling area versus your 1 or 2 accessory buildings is covered under that percentage. But I do not believe that the current draft talks about whether one can be of a certain size and the second one much smaller. Yeah.
I don't think so. I was just checking that, Brad, and I don't see.
Yeah.
I don't see anything with that, but we will clarify that and for residents. So I think you might have already answered the next question related to garages, because it was asking if if there was a specific area requirement for a garage, but there's not, because it's covered off. There's a maximum site coverage that you can cover the lot with your buildings, and as Brad said, it's up to the individual landowner how that area gets distributed. But the area of the dwelling and the garage and any other accessory buildings, that also includes a deck, if your deck is attached to your house, can't exceed the maximum site coverage. And that percentage is identified in the individual districts, land use districts. Okay, and a couple of other questions came up related to accessory buildings as well. So it said, can you confirm if an accessory building is a permanent structure, or are movable structures also considered an accessory building?
That's a good question, and I assume we've dealt with that in the past with talking about accessory buildings that are on skids or are not affixed to a foundation where you are essentially bolted into cement. I think the approach that we've been taking with other summer villages is if it's a substantial building, whether or not it is on a gravel pad, or if it is either has a basement, or if it's on some sort of concrete structure, that's a permanent building. If you can't easily move it, it's treated as a permanent building. There is discussion in there about moved-in buildings and how they would be dealt with by the development authority and how they would be considered. But at the end of the day, if you are dealing with an accessory building that is there for the foreseeable future, I believe we are treating it as a permanent building.
Okay, and then the next question is, why would backlots not be able to put a garage in the front yard, given that the backlots look directly onto the garages of the lakefront properties? But oh, sorry, go ahead, Brad.
No, go ahead. If there was more to that.
Nope, that was it. Okay.
That's a good question, and we can bring that up with council as to whether or not for the backlot having it in the front yard is appropriate or not. There are definitely scenarios in which I've seen with summer villages where a garage is considered within the front yard of a backlot. Specifically, if you are looking at having it right next to your driveway and it not be an attached part of your dwelling. I think with respect to the the lakefront lots, having the accessory building in the rear yard, adjacent to the road rather than the lake, is specifically to ensure that area adjacent to the lake kind of remains free of I guess the accessory buildings, so that they're not located near the lake in a way that visually clutters the lake or kind of blocks views. That's historically how Summer Village land use bylaws have looked at those two different lot classifications, whether you're directly adjacent to the lake or on the backside. That the folks on the lake side, their accessory buildings are adjacent to the road rather than on the lake side.
Brad, I was just looking in the accessory buildings section, and it says that accessory buildings on back lots may be allowed within the front yard or the rear yard of the lot.
Yeah, yeah.
So I believe that garages are allowed on
Yeah.
in the front yard of a back lot.
Yeah, I'm remembering that too. So
Yeah,
I might have just misspoke earlier about that.
that's a good question, because I understand it gets confusing for folks depending on what kind of lot that you have. Okay, and then the last question related to accessory buildings is, can the principal residence be over a garage?
If your garage is physically part of your dwelling, it is not considered an accessory building. It is considered your dwelling. I have a attached garage to my home, so it is it's the principal dwelling. It doesn't factor into the calculation of an accessory building. That having been said, if you run out to Home Depot and grab a 16-foot 2x4 and pound your accessory building onto your dwelling, that doesn't mean that it is now part of your dwelling and you can have an extra accessory building. But if you are in a situation where, like many homes in the city of Edmonton, your bedroom is above your garage, that's your dwelling. That's not an accessory building. Accessory building is another building on your lot that is used for accessory purposes.
Yeah, I think summer villages are a little bit unique in that oftentimes, and Golden Days is a little bit more varied, but oftentimes the lots are long and skinny, or so you typically have your your cabin or your dwelling, and then you have your garage that are separate, often having it on the side or attached. Sometimes it just doesn't work with the configuration of the lot. But it also just depends on the summer villages, because Golden Days actually has a lot more variety in the type and the shape of the lots than some of the other summer villages that we've worked with. So really just every summer village is a little bit unique in their built form, for sure. Okay, that was all the questions related to accessory buildings.
Great, and thanks everyone for the questions. And we again will catalog those for council and have that have this discussion again with them. Another section, and I will give full props to the Summer Village for already doing this in some ways. When we reviewed the Summer Village's current land use bylaw, there is a section in there about environmental protection. And that is not something that we typically see in summer villages. So it's unique, and you should be proud of having that section in your land use bylaw dealing with protecting sensitive and important environmental features in your municipality. So we're proposing to keep a lot of that, but augment it and supplement it with some additional information, specifically dealing with recommendations that you'll find in the Pigeon Lake Watershed Management Plan, which was endorsed by the Summer Village and all the other municipalities around Pigeon Lake. So what this section has in it now is the meat of what's in there now in the current land use bylaw, but we also outline when wetland assessments may be required if your if land within the Summer Village has wetlands on it or appears to, what some of the permitting requirements would be for modifying the shoreline. Excuse me. The language within it discourages making non-vegetative modifications, except to prevent erosion within the Summer Village. And the language also prohibits adding sand along the bed and shore of the Pigeon Lake. Again, these are kind of recommendations taken from the Pigeon Lake Watershed Management Plan. But what it also talks about is what some of the shoreline modifications that may be considered, what they'll do. And there are things such as incorporating the revegetation and the use of soft landscaping elements adjacent to the shore. And this is something that we're seeing in a lot of summer villages on Pigeon Lake, the efforts to revegetate the shoreline, to incorporate low impact development strategies, so that the amount of non-permeable surface that is developed adjacent to the shoreline is kept to a minimum, and to minimize the use of hard landscaping, specifically adjacent to the shore. Non-permeable surfaces, what they do is they impact stormwater runoff. So when you have snow and rain events, water coming off your roof, the quicker that enters the lake, the more of a negative impact it has on the lake, the water quality, and the how healthy the lake is in the future. Typically, land use bylaws don't directly address lake health, but with the current environmental protection section in the land use bylaw and kind of the direction that summer villages have been going in recently, we saw this as an opportunity to kind of bolster some of the regulations in there to make sure that this is a priority for the summer village and the community in general. So moving to the next one, again, these kind of cover the environmental aspects to development. So I think we might look at having them in a singular section so that we can look at how they relate to each other and how they could potentially be combined and condensed and made a bit more clear. So another section that's kind of covered in the land use bylaw right now is dealing with grading, stripping, and drainage of lots. So it's an existing section, and what we've done is we've expanded it to help the development authority understand what they can and can't, what they could potentially ask for with respect to a development permit application for grading and stripping on lawn lots. So what the draft land use bylaw does is it requires development permits and potentially lot grading and drainage plans for any major or substantial developments that alter drainage in the summer village. So that would be things like moving or depositing and storing topsoil, fill, or other aggregates, or stripping, grading, major land disruption events, I guess you would call, when you're building new dwellings or undertaking major landscaping of a lot, that when you apply for those development permits, these are things that the development authority would be looking for potentially to ensure that the health of the lake and the watershed in general is looked after. This section deals with prohibiting grading that would impede or interfere with the natural flow of surface water, whether it goes onto adjacent municipal lands, neighboring properties, or into the ditches. And it identifies what those requirements would be for if you were to require a lot grading and drainage plan, what some of those things would be that the development authority may be looking for. So those would be things like pre and post development grades, the elevations, the location of any swales, and a statement or how you'll demonstrate how runoff will be controlled on site, and really any other drainage information that would be required by the development authority. So a lot of these were requirements before, but they weren't quite as clearly spelled out for potential applicants or for the development authority to kind of fully understand what could be asked for. And we just want to ensure that what we're doing in the summer village is not creating a situation where, as lots are developed or redeveloped, that the municipality is kind of able to understand the bigger picture of what's going on, and we're not creating a situation where either stormwater or on-site water is going to be directed in the right location. That it's going to be either controlled on-site or it's going to head in the right spot. And we're not going to run into situations where neighboring lots are going to have to suffer the blunt of lack of drainage plans done by their neighbors. When you don't require things like this, it kind of leaves everyone on their own. And as construction occurs, we see issues with seasonal flooding or negative impacts as a result. Some more on the environmental side. A new section that we've added deals with sediment control and erosion on sites. These are recommendations from the Pigeon Lake Watershed Management Plan, and it would require erosion and sediment control plans for major developments that affect drainage on site. So again, this kind of covers stripping and grading, removing or moving topsoil aggregates, and dwellings, and major landscaping projects as well. So it's kind of very similar to what we talked about before, but it would be covering things like dealing with making sure that sediment stored on site is dealt with in a proper manner. The next specific regulation section that kind of we've highlighted for your review deals with guest houses. And a guest house can be a standalone building on a lot. It can be developed above a garage as a garage suite. That's the type of guest housing that we're talking about. In this draft and in the current, having a guest house requires a development permit. The regulations that we have in the current draft talk about having that they were only permitted on lots with an existing approved dwelling, and the maximum would be one on a lot. So if you do want to have a guest house, you can't be putting one up for each of your aunts and uncles. That it would just be one on a lot, in addition to the primary dwelling. The current draft looks at ensuring that we're not talking about just moving a manufactured home onto a lot and calling it a guest house, or calling your recreational vehicle a guest house, or plopping a sea can on there and talking about it being an in-law suite. That guest houses must be of new or conventional construction. On lakefront lots, as with accessory buildings, they would only be located in the rear yard, like all other accessory buildings. And there's provisions in there in terms of the maximum height and floor area of a guest house, to ensure that it remains accessory and secondary to the primary dwelling. Another existing section in the land use bylaw that we've made some tweaks to respect recreational vehicles, just to clarify some siting and permitting requirements, to make sure that as recreational vehicles are used or stored on site, they are done so in a way that doesn't create issues with adjacent landowners. So placing a recreational vehicle on a lot would require a development permit, and that development permit would only really need to indicate where it would be placed on a permanent basis if you're looking at having it stored permanently, where an additional RV may be placed on a temporary basis. If we're talking about a permanent recreational vehicle stored there year round, how water or wastewater utilities might be connected, and where parking would be provided for anyone that might be using that recreational vehicle on site. There's provisions in there to make sure that they are located entirely within the boundary of the lot, and meet all required setbacks to make sure that as it's located on the lot, it's not creating a hazard for oncoming vehicles on the adjacent road, or sited in such a way that it is safe for all people within the community. We spelled out there too that wastewater from recreational vehicles in the summer village, as required, shall not dispose of wastewater on the ground. Yeah, and as with the current land use bylaw, There are provisions in the current land use bylaw for having an extra RV in addition to a permanent one or a temporary one for extraordinary events. And I believe it's spelled out in the current draft, but maybe we can make it a bit more obvious. But that would be things like having a family reunion or in instances that are not your typical weekend, to ensure that we're not flooding the summer village with recreational vehicles on a regular basis.
Brad, we had a question.
Yeah.
Related to recreational vehicles. So the question was, to clarify, we need a permit to park RVs on our property for storage purposes.
Sorry, do or currently do?
In the new land use bylaw.
In the current draft, it indicates that a development permit would be required. With those steps, it wouldn't be an arduous permit to apply for, but it would just make sure it would be an agreement between the landowner and the summer village, just to make sure that these steps are being followed properly, and that there is sufficient space to be able to store that recreational vehicle. It's an approach that different municipalities have been taking, or summer villages have been taking, whether to require a development permit or not. It's what we have proposed. We reviewed it with council, and they asked us to flag this for discussion. So if anyone has any thoughts on that topic or not, please, send us those comments or email, or give us a phone call, and we can discuss it in greater detail. It's just the approach that we've taken with this current draft, but we'll be open to hearing what people think about it.
Okay, and there's actually a couple of other questions that came up related to RVs. So why would backlot owners have to place their RVs in the backlot only? And I can just provide a little context. I just checked the current land use bylaw, and that's already a requirement. That's something that we've carried over into the new land use bylaw.
Yeah, I think that's probably why it's carried over. That we're not proposing a change with that respect.
So if anyone does have any comments about that, please do send them, and then we'll compile all those to chat with council when we have our next meeting. Sorry, Brad, do we have a section about CCANs in the presentation?
That's coming up next.
Later? Okay. Yep. Okay, we had a question about that, so I will save that for when we get to that section.
That's fair.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, I'm free to move on. Great. CCANs, not to spoil the next slide coming up here. CCANs, this is something that is not directly addressed in the current land use bylaw, but it's something that we've noticed popping up in different summer villages throughout Alberta. The use of CCANs either as an accessory building, or where you put your buddies when they come out to the lake on the weekend. I guess if you can put a cot in a CCAN, it could be keep you dry from the elements. But in our discussions with council and administration, we talked about the use of CCANs and restricting their use as a principal dwelling. So if you were hoping to, use a CCAN as your home in and of itself, as shown in this picture, that's not the direction that we were given, or being used as a guest house. There are provisions in there for allowing them as an accessory building, with the caveat that the development authority has within its discretion to require, as it's cited on the lot, to require buffering or any sort of aesthetic improvements to make sure that it conforms to the immediate area and doesn't create a hassle for adjacent landowners or the community in general. It shall not be located in the front yard of any lot. It restricts how high or the size of the CCAN that you can use. when being used as an accessory building. And it does contemplate the idea of it being used as a building material in a principal dwelling. So we're not talking about situations where you just cut out a window hole and suddenly it's now your home. We're talking about using it as a substantial construction material that will be recladded, and at the end of the day, you wouldn't be able to necessarily tell that your home is not necessarily a wood construction home, but it is either entirely or fully or in part constructed of a CCAN. So this is something that wasn't covered in the current land use bylaw. We added it in after discussing this with council and administration, but we're again open to your thoughts and ideas about how CCANs may or may not be used in the summer village. So Alison, there were questions?
It was actually just a comment that CCANs are not to be used as a bunkhouse, and so the regulation in the draft land use bylaw indicates that no human or animal habitation is allowed within a CCAN. So just to confirm,
yeah,
that's how that translates into the regulation.
Yeah.
In the land use bylaw.
Yeah, I would keep my kids in one, but we're not in a situation where the direction we've been given or recommending is to use them directly as habitation for either humans or animals. More environmental regulations that we might be looking at kind of condensing into a single section, but talking about site coverage and landscaping on lots. This is something that is addressed in pretty good detail in the current land use bylaw. But in the draft, we talk about requiring development permits for any landscaping that would alter drainage patterns or the quantity and quality of runoff into either water courses or water bodies or potentially onto adjacent lots. We're not talking about planting a few rose bushes in the corner of your lot. We're talking about major landscaping that would alter those drainage patterns. In those situations where you'd be altering drainage patterns, there would be a requirement for potentially having landscaping plans, and that would identify the site dimensions of the lot and where the landscaping would occur, any and all or proposed existing berms and contours and where fences and retaining walls would be located, the lot grading and drainage of the site, where vegetation would be retained and where new vegetation would be proposed, and the location of non-permeable surfaces and other landscaping elements on site. So again, this is not, if you're looking to have a little fire pit area that you landscape with some elements, this isn't necessarily for something of that scale. But if you are doing a major overhaul of how your property is landscaped, it would just be requirements to make sure that this is done in a way that it's not negatively impacting how water runoff impacts the environment or your neighbors. Further, this is the same section, site coverage and landscaping. There are requirements in the current land use bylaw for retaining landscaped areas and vegetation areas. It's a bit confusing the way in which it's worded, because what it does is it says of the non-building area, a certain percentage must be retained as landscaped area or vegetation. And rather than have to do that kind of reverse calculation, what we've done is kind of pull it backwards and say that of your lot, 30% must be vegetated, whether and then it kind of deals a bit more in terms of the native vegetation and the non-native vegetation as you choose to landscape your lot. So just making sure that that vegetation remains, that each lot has the trees and shrubs needed to not only improve the aesthetics of your lot, but also to provide that ground cover and important tool in filtering stormwater and improving the overall health of Pigeon Lake. So what we've identified are those minimum requirements for the vegetation cover and recommendations for incorporating low impact development features on your lot. Kind of dealing with that as well, we've added a section with respect to tree removal. The current land use bylaw does deal with the removal of trees. Specifically, it refers to it as, I believe, stripping or clearing of trees. But our approach in doing this is taken a bit more directly. And what we've identified is in our recommendation to council that as a few other summer villages are doing on Pigeon Lake, removal of trees, unless you're in a situation where it would be exempted with respect to it being a safety issue or an issue where the trees would be diseased, that the removal would require a development permit. And that permit would identify what trees are being removed, what the replanting would be on the lot to make sure that you're replacing those trees and maintaining that vegetated cover requirements, and identifying the reason for doing such. And if you're looking at having substantial tree removal on your site, to have an arborist report to identify why and what trees and how you would make sure that those trees that are being replanted would thrive on the lot. So I know that I think this is an issue that has popped up in the past and perhaps currently in the Summer Village. So what we've done is provided the Development Authority that ability to kind of control how tree removal occurs in the Summer Village, and to make sure that a healthy tree cover it remains at the end of the day. I believe this might be our last of these regulation subsections, but it's something that council asked us to add as well with respect to tourist homes. So these would be either a dwelling or a portion of a dwelling that would be used, that would be operated as a temporary place to stay. Typically what you would see is something that would be advertised on Airbnb or another online method for either a few days or a week at a time. It's something that's not currently in the land use bylaw as something being addressed. As I think many people know, it's kind of a newer thing that's popped up in recent years, kind of the renting of an entire home or a portion of a home for short-term use. And the direction we were given was to not allow it in the Summer Village. So we've identified that in the land use bylaw, and we've not included tourist homes as a use, as a permitted or discretionary use in any of the districts. So that's how it's written in the current draft. Again, it's silent in the current land use bylaw. And it's how we were directed to do so in the current draft. It doesn't prohibit situations where you might be renting to your to a friend or to a to anyone really for like a 2 years at a time or a month lease of a home if that was your situation. Where it's looking at those short-term rental accommodations. If the Summer Village wanted to consider, allowing this to exist in the future, it might be controlled through a specific bylaw that some Summer Villages have implemented to identify licensing requirements or how you would operate so that you weren't, so that Summer Village wasn't taking enforcement action.
Brad, we actually have a question related to tourist homes.
Sure.
So the question is, are tourist homes banned in other summer villages on the lake?
On Pigeon Lake, the land use bylaw projects that we've been working on recently, none of them have been approved yet. And I cannot remember offhand how exactly what the direction we've been given on them has been. I can say generally though, the councils that we've been working with have directed us to not allow them. And I think it's a matter of having received either complaints or experienced less than favorable experiences with them in their communities, that they've been looking to take the direction of not allowing them within the land use bylaw, or the situations are that we remain silent on them. So their current land use bylaw doesn't say anything about a tourist home, and the proposed new land use bylaw continues to not say anything about them. I'm not thinking of a specific municipality. I can't think of a specific municipality that has said, yes, we want to continue to allow them, and these are the rules in which they want to continue to operate. We do know of a few on Sylvan Lake that have implemented specific bylaws with respect to how tourist homes can operate. And I can't remember the details of the bylaws just yet, but I in my experience, that situation is more rare than those that look to not allow them within their community.
Yeah, I don't think any of the summer villages around Pigeon Lake are currently prohibiting them,
Yeah.
or allowing them. Like they're just not spoken to at all.
Yeah.
Sylvia, I don't know, sorry to put you on the spot there, but any of your summer villages, I don't think anyone is specifically prohibiting or allowing them right now, are they?
Right now, they're not in a lot of.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Judy will talk to that.
Right now, there's not a lot of information in the land use bylaws around the lake about Airbnb or tourist homes. And that's one of the things that we're adding.
Exactly. So just for a little bit of context, a lot of the land use bylaws for the summer villages around Pigeon Lake are, in the 10-year mark, 10 to 15 years old. So a lot of them right now are going through the process of renewing, or I guess revising and updating their land use bylaws. So I think it'll be something that gets discussed. So Brad, sort of related to the comment about Sylvan Lake, we had a comment in the chat, or I guess a comment/question. It said, if not allowed for, people may just go underground. Why not allow them with permits? Sylvan Lake is working on a bylaw right now. So a little bit of, it's very difficult to enforce. Like it's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
And that's one of the considerations, because it's very difficult to determine that it's actually happening.
Yeah.
Whether,
In our experience, it would require a member of the municipal administration to, as they pour their coffee in the morning, to scour Airbnb and other websites to see what's being rented in their community, and then going about taking enforcement action. So there's definitely different approaches to it. I hope it literally isn't taken underground where you are, operating subterraneanly. It's certainly something that is it's popping up more and more recently. To use a much bigger municipality's example of how they operate it, the town of Canmore has a massive flow chart identifying, if you want to rent out a portion of your home, how you can go about doing it, whether you are in, depending on which land use district you're within, and whether you are looking to rent for a short period of time or a long period of time. It's kind of it's something that certainly goes around in circles when we talk about this, whether to specifically prohibit it or remain silent. But for the time being, the direction we were given was to speak about it in the land use bylaw briefly, to not allow it, and to not to have it specifically mentioned, and then not listed as a permitted or discretionary use, it kind of clearly spells out that that it is not an allowed land use within the village, or sorry, the summer village, and kind of provides a little bit of teeth for administration should they wish to pursue enforcement action. So, was there anything else on that, Alison? Okay. So, welcome to your summer village. This is the land use district map. And I'll get into a bit more details shortly with respect to the different districts that are shown on the legend here. But I think one of the main things that we note are that the residential district covers a fair bit of the developed area of the summer village. And that we also have a significant portion of land and lands that are within the direct control district. And that purple dotted area that you see in the kind of the north end of the summer village deals with an inactive landfill that is located within the summer village and affects lands within it and the surrounding counties. So the land use district map that we're showing you here right now isn't really all that different than what's in the current land use bylaw. It is colorized. It's used with modern software. But at the end of the day, a lot of the line work is the same as in both documents. So section 10 deals with establishing those different land use districts. And it provides some basic rules about how council and administration will interpret the boundaries of them. So some of the boundaries that you see on the map aren't necessarily following property boundaries, specifically with respect to that inactive landfill area and the boundaries of some of the direct control districts. So it talks about how council and administration will interpret those boundaries, and it provides for what we're calling the landfill development setback overlay. So lands within a prescribed distance of the former landfill site, there's a few extra regulations that need to be followed to make sure that they're conforming with provincial requirements. But at the end of the day, there's not a change in the number of land use districts or the names. So if you are within the residential district today, we're not going and changing that name on you or adding a new one for you to look up. So that yellow area that you see dealing with most of the residential lots, privately owned residential lots within the summer village or within the R1 or the residential district. We have not proposed any changes to lot area requirements, building site coverage, the setbacks on the lot, or really any other existing site regulations. How they're structured and worded are a little bit different, but at the end of the day, those numbers that you would be following today are as are proposed in the current draft. The districts in the current land use, the districts in the current land use bylaw are a bit longer than what are in the draft. And that's because a lot of those regulations that I covered a few of before and showed you in that chart, we've pulled them out of the districts and just identified them separately in their own section. So it makes the district regulations a bit shorter. And I think it highlights what those important general regulations are. So in the list of permitted and discretionary uses, there were some minor tweaks in there, and that's mainly to be consistent with some of the definitions that are in that expanded definition section in section, I believe it's section 2 of the document. We have the institutional camp district, the IC district, and that's something that is in there today. Again, minor adjustments to the permitted and discretionary uses, not only with respect to making sure that they're consistent with those definitions, but there were a few things missing with respect to park space and open space, and just a discussion about accessory buildings and secondary uses on site. There's no changes to lot coverage requirements. and development within that institutional camp district that you see in the blue, that I believe it's a single lot or at least portions of two. Development on there would be determined by the development authority with respect to who would consider things like off-site impacts, safety, and the use and enjoyment of adjacent lots. So not knowing exactly how the site might be developed in the future, it provides the development authority with that discretion and ability to use their better judgment to determine whether or not development proposals on there work with the rest of the summer village. Another major land use district in the draft land use bylaw and the current land use bylaw deals with the unsubdivided cottage district with respect to the Vassal Lodge part of the community. And this site is a bit different because those individual, they're called notational lots within the land use district, the land use bylaw. They don't show up on this map because they aren't property boundaries like you would see on any other land ownership map. Just how that site operates with as a community within the community is a bit different. So there are some minor adjustments to the permitted and discretionary uses similar to the residential district, but generally speaking, it's kept as it is today. But there being no further changes to the restriction of subdivision within that area, maximum number of buildings on a lot coverage, the yards and building height requirements. There's a Parks and Reserve District, PR. It's spoken of in the current land use bylaw, but oddly enough, there are no specific PR regulations within it. And that deals with municipal reserve parcels and parks within the summer village. So we added a purpose statement in there. We added a general list of permitted and discretionary uses that would be considered should development occur on those lots, and just some basic site regulation requirements. And that would largely be for the municipality to follow its own rules. The direct control district, which is that larger gray area of what is largely undeveloped land within the summer village. The direct control district is a special beast because development decisions that are made within there are not for the development authority, they're for council's consideration. And council acts as the development authority for that direct control district. So there is one currently in place. It's a bit of a special animal in terms of the land use bylaw. It's one of the few roles that council has to play in enforcing and implementing the land use bylaw. And so the regulations are largely kept the same. What it talks about in part is considerations for should this land be developed or subdivided in the future, what council may or may not consider. So we've expanded some of the regulations to identify some subdivision and development application requirements and process requirements. And should development proposals be made in the future for this area, what council will consider when those come in. The Summer Village's municipal development plan, which is that forward-thinking document that looks at how the Summer Village will be developed in the future, it talks about that it kind of speaks generally in the in terms of this area. So I feel like between the land use bylaw and the municipal development plan, I think the municipal development plan could probably be updated to include those recommendations as well, but that's something for another day for council's consideration. Within that direct control district in the gray, there is that purple dotted area. that kind of forms an arch around the square, which is the inactive landfill within the summer village. I believe it was formerly part of one of the counties, or at least falls into either Ladue County or the County of Wetaskiwin in the past. But there are provincial requirements for what types of development can occur next to an active or an inactive landfill, specifically within 300 meters. Unless that area is properly reclaimed and provided a letter of clearance from the province, there are restrictions on what can occur. And largely that deals with things like residential development, or developments that would require, that would have food services or educational components. So what this inactive landfill development setback overlay does is it just identifies for administration and development authorities consideration that there are some additional special rules that need to be followed should a development permit be applied for within that area, just to make sure that provincial rules are being followed. So I hope no one has fallen asleep. Going through a land use bylaw is not something that you should do and then operate heavy machinery or equipment. It is a very technical document. The draft that we have is a bit longer than what you currently have for a land use bylaw, because we are trying to spell out the rules and requirements that would be followed for different processes and specific application that might be made within the summer village that we might anticipate. Just because it's longer doesn't mean there's more quote unquote red tape. I feel like the longer of a document you have in these situations, you're almost reducing that additional bureaucratic level, because there isn't the question of what might I be asked to provide. I feel like our draft more clearly identifies some of the rules and requirements that need to be followed in order to submit a successful or a development permit for consideration by the development authority or subdivision. So please, if you haven't done so already, have a read through. We appreciate any specific or general comments you may or may not have. We would like you to review it. It's on the Summer Village's website. If you have issues with accessing it, please contact me or Allison at any time. We would like to get feedback in early April so that we can continue to meet with council and go over some of the feedback that we receive and how it can be used to improve the draft document, or to tweak or revise how we might be addressing certain things. That deadline isn't specifically a hard deadline. If you feel you need a little bit more time, just let us know. We can certainly accommodate feedback after that date as well. But if we don't, we just leave it open-ended. We just don't want to leave you in a situation where you either forgot to, provide your feedback, or you felt like you had a longer period of time than what we were operating on in terms of our timeline. So I look forward to hearing from anyone, either via phone, I believe that's on one of the next slides here, or via email, or if you want to contact the Summer Village directly, they can forward it along as well.
And just to clarify, Brad's not living in the past. That should say April 8th, 2022.
Yes, you were all late. This is one of the hazards of doing a PowerPoint early in the year and on a weekend of where daylight time has changed. So,
yeah, and I just want to say, if anyone has any additional questions, or if I happen to miss your question in the chat, I apologize. I was trying to make sure I captured everything. The only one that I had carried over, you actually kind of already addressed. It was a question about the length of the land use bylaw, but you've already captured that. So if anyone has any other questions, please do send them to me. But I think you captured most of it while we were going through, Brad. So
yeah, and all the feedback that we get today, anything that we get tomorrow morning or in the following days. We will do our best to answer on the spot, or have that discussion with you if you want to have a greater discussion about current or proposed regulations in the land use bylaw. We'll compile everything that we get, whether it's good job or bad job, or here are my thoughts about recreational vehicles. We'll compile all of that into a what we heard report that we're going to share with that we'll put it into a document so everyone can have a chance to look at what's being said. So use nice language if you can, and council as well, and we'll review that with council and administration. And then from there, once we've reviewed it with council and come up with some recommendations, we will further update the draft and look at moving it along to potentially having the adoption phase of this project as we put the draft together. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. Time change is hard on all of us. I can't tell if it is 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock right now. But I appreciate everyone spending time with us tonight, whether through the full thing or for a few minutes, whether on YouTube or on Zoom, or if you're watching this on YouTube in the coming days. Thanks for giving us your time and generally caring about your community, because the more input and the more people that we can have help us on this project, I feel like the better document that we'll have at the end of the day. So if Alison, if there's any other questions, I would be happy to have that discussion or answer them.
Nothing else has come up in the chat.
Sure.
So last call, I guess. But you can always, obviously, as Brad already said, contact us afterwards. If you think of questions later on, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll work with Sylvia to get a link to the YouTube video posted on the website as well. So in the next day or so. Okay. I think that's it, Brad.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.